Up here. Good.
More volunteers. I'm sure there must be some there. You should say young people. I didn't want to be ageist. Right, let's see if we can see everybody. Get you all looking this way.
Welcome everyone. Welcome. Good to see so many new, fresh, and I was going to say old, but I won't, familiar faces around. Thank you for being here. The launch of our African History Season 2013. Special welcome to our Mayor, Councillor Nana Asante. It's a real honour It's a real honour for me today to welcome an African as the first citizen of Harrow. Welcome. And of course, I'd like to welcome, I don't think it needs an introduction, but a lot of you will know Lee, who will be taking us through this evening. So welcome Lee, good to see you. My brother, good to see you. Welcome Alderman Thomas, who's always cleansing himself by attending the Harrow Black History Season. Welcome, Alderman Thomas. And of course, many councillors who are here today, thank you for coming. And thank you, Harrow Council, for supporting us with Black History Season for the past few years. Thank you very much. And of course, special welcome to you all. I'm sure you're going to find this year's Black History Season events extremely thought-provoking. I'm here to learn, and I'm sure you are as well. And I think we're going to kick off today with this year's theme about African-British civil rights since the 1960s. Just a few more words from me. We've made a lot of progress over the past decades and seen many changes. But I also think, have we only just scratched the surface? How deep-rooted have the changes been? And I think it's very apt we're talking about this year about African civil rights, especially given some of the revelations more recently. Revelations about institutions, about institutional racism, like the Met, the fire service in Birmingham, and the practice of unions such as NAPA. I'm sure many of you will have other examples. So I'm here to learn, to listen, to share, and be invigorated to continue to raise the issues and continue to fight the good fight. So welcome and thank you. Enjoy.
Well, thank you everybody for being here. I mean, African History Month wouldn't be the same without your presence. And what I love about African History Month in Harrow is that we learn together. There's so many parts of history that we don't know. And discovering about African British civil rights is quite an education. Because for most of us, when we think of civil rights, we think of America, Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and that's where our history ends. But most of us don't realize that there was a civil rights movement here. There's been a struggle here for years. That lots of people have been part of the changes that we are now enjoying. So when you get our kids who grew up here, who are born here, telling us that, oh, we've got a chip on our shoulder because there's no problem, we know that they haven't actually understood what struggle is. They haven't actually understood that even unions that are the bastion of equality and the fight was sometimes a problem. And the example I'll give you is Bristol. You had the union which is now Unite, which happens to be my union, so I declare an interest. But it was the TNG at the time. They were at the heart of promoting segregation. We don't want Asians and we don't want Africans driving the buses because it will cause a problem. This was a union. That particular union was fighting against apartheid South Africa. They didn't see a contradiction in that. But this is pre-1965. We talk about 1963. And maybe some of us have forgotten that the struggle goes back. So this was Bristol. We studied this together when we looked at Paul Stevenson and the Bristol bus boycott. Because believe it or not, there was a boycott here. And that boycott was supported by people like Harold Wilson, Tony Benn. It was a real movement. It was a time when politics was exciting, that's what I'd say. It was a time when people knew that you could make a difference by coming together. But what is even more important, that on the back of that civil rights movement, what you had was the Race Relations Act. And the Race Relations Act is what we all enjoy today. The freedoms we enjoy today, which are enshrined in law, came out of that boycott. So studying African-British civil rights is very important because it reminds us of our journey. And that's why history is important, because history is a clock that people use to tell their time and their place in history. And that's why we need to keep studying it. And we need to learn history from different perspectives. And here during African History Month, we learn history through the eyes of Africans. And it's important that we do that because they're part of the world community. But too often, they're erased from history. And that is why Carter Woodson started Black History Month. And it's important that we continue it because together we learn a lot. We learn about our human family, and together we grow as a people. So I do thank you for being part of this journey. African History Month in Harrow is usually exciting because we do all sorts of things. There's a film night coming up, and I'll talk about that because it's in my ward. It's in Flash Musicals. And film night is exciting. We start with African hospitality, and then we watch a film with popcorn and we discuss it. So I hope you'll all enjoy it. You'll come. There is a charge for that. It's not a funded event, and it's something that we are hoping will help run Flash Musicals. It is still a dream, a social enterprise that hasn't quite taken off, but with your support, it will. So we just hope that you'll be part of this exciting thing that is African History Month, and that together we'll learn, we'll share, and we'll apply the lessons to today's world. Because as Devin rightly pointed out, institutional racism is still a very big problem. A lot of people are in denial, but it is a problem. And it's only by accepting that there is a problem that we tackle it together. Because this world can be even more beautiful than it is. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you to Harrow Black History Month Steering Group for extending this invitation to me. I remember 2008, we had quite a great reception, I recall, from the assembled audience, so I'm hoping to emulate that here again today. African history is very important. Part of my responsibilities when I was in the Mayor's office is to launch Black History Season. I'm glad that the notion that we've got Black History Month expanding from 4 weeks in October to as long as people feel necessary to cover those issues has been taken up by Black History Month here in Harrow. And when we launched it in the Mayor's office, we said October should be a month where you decide what you're doing on these issues for the rest of the year, not something that is relegated. Of course, in the black community, Black History Month was always caricatured because it was said it was Black History Month, but then it was White History Year in every other month in following October. And so there was cynicism around the extent to which people are really committed. And you can only do so much Mary Seacole, steel pan and samosa as a Black History Month before you begin to question whether or not people are taking this as a very serious activity. So I'm glad on two counts. One, that it's got an African history focus, and two, that it is beyond the narrow confines of October as a month to celebrate these things. And in a city like London, which is one of the most diverse and culturally hyper-diverse cities on the face of the planet, is it not right that we have a diversity of perspectives when we look about the history of this country and the history of London as its capital? And that's been a long and rich history. then just a little bit about myself. My own African history is that my grandfather came here in the early 1900s. He actually stowed away at the age of 15 from the border of Sierra Leone and Liberia, part of the Kru people. Any Kru people in the house? Sierra Leone, Kru? Yes, you find someone close. It's not just the Caribbean that has small island business, you know. The continent does it quite well itself. We escaped here, we came here in the early 1900s. He was a stowaway on a British merchant navy ship. And he arrived here in the early 1900s. I think he was one of the first deportees because they caught him and sent him back right away. But such was his fortitude and demeanour that he got right back on the next ship and came to England, where he made his life and married my grandmother, who was from Ireland, in Manchester. And so I grew up with my African grandfather. So when I say I'm African Caribbean, I don't mean it in the pejorative sense of an equal opportunity sport. I actually mean that my grandfather was from Africa and my father was from Jamaica, and therefore I am an African Caribbean by dint of that. On my father's side, his father was Jamaican of African descent and his mother was Cuban. So I suppose being an African with a little bit of Jamaica, a little bit of Cuba, a little bit of Ireland, those genes were always going to get me into trouble at some point. So I could blame my genetic disposition as being a citizen of the world from the fire of Cuba, the strength of Africa, the comedy of Ireland, and the pragmatic administrative capability of England, which I always find. We British are amazing at creating bureaucracy. In fact, I think we're the architects, aren't we? Give us a problem and we'll create a subcommittee and strangle the living life out of an idea for the next 42 hours in discussion over constitutional niceties. But enough of me and on to the issue concerned. One of the things that I managed to do when I was in the Mayor's office is to establish the Mayor's Commission on Asian and African Heritage. And what, chaired by Dame Jocelyn Bauer, and what the conclusion of that report indicated is just how weak and fragile the whole area of disparate people's histories are in the museum, heritage, curriculum and other sectors. But I want to suggest that although we do want local authorities and we do want statutory agencies to, if you like, reflect the reality of the making of the modern Britain, and let's face it, most fundamentally, Africans funded through the profits raised from slavery, the Industrial Revolution. It was the catalyst for the huge reservoirs of financial investment necessary to conduct the research and development that then led to the explosion of the industrial age here in the United Kingdom. So there can be no doubt about that. Any economist or any student of history will come to the same conclusion if their eyes are not blinded by prejudice or ignorance. So we have cemented our place in this history of this country and ought to be reflected in that, those things that statutory agencies do. But I want to suggest something else in relation to that. Because if we as Africans do not value our own history, it will not be valued by anybody else. And the reason why I say that is because Black History Month is in a difficult period of its life, particularly with, without being political, with a coalition government and with the sense in which now austerity cuts are meaning cuts to Black History Month budgets. Boris cut London's Black History Month in order to fund America Day on the 4th of July, because obviously American culture is in such a desperate state that it needs money from Black History Month to further propagate our understanding of our great American cousins. But that aside, even if they were to fund it to £1 million a year, if the history was not valued by the people themselves, then it becomes a fraud, it becomes a cosmetic exercise. And my challenge to our own community is that money can't solve our historical problem. Only ownership of our own culture, education and learning about that culture can solve our own problems. Part of the reason why, if you're in public life and you get battered by the storms of attack, persecution, media hostility. You can only survive that if you have a clear sense of your own African agency, if you understand your own history. And if you know that, then all of the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune and discontent slung at you by various daily mails and London Standards cannot harm you. And so what I say to you, I recommend it to you not just as an educational tool, but actually as a profound piece of your psychological and cultural armour as Africans operating in a hostile environment at times, something that can see you through those darkest times. And he's right, we'll start at 1960 and work our way forward. He's given me 20 minutes and I have no idea, because he knows I speak in Castro-like proportions. So I'm not entirely sure what he's expecting, but I shall try and be as conscious of timekeeping as every other African I know. And if you start in 1958 with the explosion of rape riots in the United Kingdom with the murder of Kelsall Cochrane over there in Notting Hill. And when you're looking at British black history, there's no better place to start than in Notting Hill, West London, as it happens. Because the powerhouse that resided there, I can't go into the biographical details of every single person, but when you look at what it produced, Claudia Jones came from Trinidad after being expelled by America for being a member of the Communist Party. Do you remember? Do you remember the McCarthy witch hunts? Have you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? Well, she was a member of the Communist Party. She was the head of the Communist Party in America, in the United States. She was expelled. She wanted to go back to Trinidad. Trinidad wouldn't have her, but it was a dangerous subversive. And she ended up back here in London, over in West London. And her and her colleagues, people like John LaRose, people like Frank Critchlow, others over in West London, created a whole powerhouse of intellectual energy which fed a movement against racism and injustice emanating from West London. Focusing initially on Kelsall Cochrane, people don't realise that Claudia came up with the idea, amongst others, because I know there'll be a big dispute about who started carnivals, so don't quote me on this, amongst others, who decided how should they respond to the racial strife that was caused by the death of Kelsall Cochrane. And they came up with a festival that would celebrate multiculturalism and at its heart a celebration of freedom that was implicit in plantation culture, when slaves had the one day, enslaved Africans had the one day off in the year that they were allowed. And we're going back to one day off a year under this government, it seems to me. One day a year off that they were allowed to celebrate. They dressed up and mimicked their slave-owning plantation owners in their fancy garbs and gowns and banged tin cans to make music. And that historical tradition has carried from this day to that. What a tremendous testament to Claudia Jones and all those in those initial times, that that festival is now the biggest street festival in Europe. It's a tremendous testament and it should be applauded widely. You know, back in the 60s and so forth, we had the Immigration Act, you know. Forget it was the Labour government that introduced the Immigration Act from the British people, you know, and stripped my ancestors, and no doubt yours, of their citizenship after the 1961 Immigration Act. And so when we hear about, you know, the history of immigration, we have to be reminded as Africans that all parties have sought to use immigration as a stick to beat us with and to respond to what they perceive as a concern about immigration. And from 1960s right up until this very day, with immigration ad bans rolling around us, saying if you're illegal, go back home. But if you're a multi-million-pound tax avoider, please take a seat at the table of British citizens. The Daily Mail, after we found out the Daily Mail has an offshore tax account, and they don't pay any tax in Britain at all, no tax. So we had a demonstration out there because we were absolutely enraged that hard-working immigrant taxpayers who are paying their taxes to this country are subsidising the likes of the Daily Mail. And our demonstrations was the Daily Mail stop sponging off hard-working British immigrants' Daily Mail. And it was a resounding success. Watch me on Twitter and Facebook if you're interested in creative protests such as that. We're going to do a lot more in the forthcoming years. We go through the 70s and we have the rise of the National Front. We have the huge demonstrations around education in school. People remember the Swan Report? You don't even know your own history. Swan Report was a report about why black children weren't doing well in British schools in the 70s. And it was a major, significant reform. Read that and Bernard's Court book on why black children are being made educationally subnormal in the British education system. Read those reports and then look at what's happening today and see if you can detect if things have improved. I'll leave you with that challenge for the future. So we had the Swan Report, and what did it produce? Thousands of black women started to go to their schools to demand and defend their young people got a decent education. So there was a huge movement led by black parents that was all about taking the struggle into schools, demanding that history was more inclusive, demanding that our children stop suffering arbitrary exclusions, demanding that they were no longer designated as educationally subnormal. And these are the histories and the struggles that we have, but we don't recognise them. And this is what I say, we value the history of African Americans over and above our own history. Now I know they've got a long and glorious history, and it's unfair to compare the two. They've got they've been in a consistent struggle since the end of slavery in America. They're a unified community in a single land, and they've pushed forward in terms of that civil rights struggle. We've been here in smaller numbers for a lesser period of time, but nevertheless, we are an educated people, right? And an educated people learns from its history. It doesn't repeat the mistakes of previous generations. And that's why I say we're making a huge mistake if we do not teach our children the morals, the values. You know, the fact that, Nkrumah developed the theory of the African personality, the fact that ancient Greek civilization drew its innovation from ancient Egyptian Kemetic scientists, and so on and so forth. You know, we've got a great role to play in the development of the modern world, and it's not being recognised by the statutory authorities. And my central premise is that's because it's not being recognised by us. And if it weren't recognised by them, but it was recognised by us, it wouldn't give a never mind. Because if we supported our supplementary school movements, all started as a consequence of the Swan Report in the 1970s, Saturday schools, supplementary schools, great big movement started by black women, thousands of them all over this country. And most of us can't remember even one of their names to bring to bear to a conversation about that. And that's what I'm saying about the marginalisation of our history. It's not just they're marginalising our history, it is that we are marginalising our history. We prefer to talk about Martin Luther King than talk about Clive Best signing for West Ham in 1975, or Laurie Cunningham. We prefer to talk about them rather than Frank Critchlow of the Mangrove Community Association in West London, who was tried to be, you're going to give me 5 minutes now, right? Tried and convicted falsely by the Metropolitan Police, or Kelso Cochrane, or all of the other great achievements that we've had. It is marginalised. And so, one of the things about the African History Month and this particular season is come and get the detail. You're going to give them the detail, right? You're going to be able to learn about what this history entails. But my central premise, and I leave you with this, is that if we do not treat our own history with respect, we can't expect anybody else to fill that gap. Thank you very much.